care? That is my first question. If the Deputy Minister can respond to that. Every year have been the point of protest by students in our PSET sector. I mean, the issue of LSFAS not paying in time, the issue of accommodation, and other such issues. Those are issues that every year, even next year, I can tell you now, I can prophesy now that even next year we're going to have these similar issues. So now, how do we ensure that we resolve these issues so that they don't keep on reoccurring over and over and over again?
Colleagues, I don't know how many of us are back on the platform. Honorable Mokhale, you are speaking and we all got kicked off again. Can I check? I know members are saying in the group they got kicked off. Let me check with someone else. Prof. Putsisi, were you kicked off as well?
Yes, we were kicked off, but we are back in, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, we're not going to be able to have a conducive meeting if this continues. So what I'm going to suggest is that we pause for about 5 minutes. I want to just call IT and understand exactly what is happening, because we've never experienced this since COVID, when we started using Zoom. So if colleagues can just take a 5 to 10 minute break and we'll get back to you. Apologies for this, colleagues. Honorable Mukhale. I think you were speaking about not normalizing these yearly protests.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Yes, well, I had asked, I asked two questions, yes. My first question was around the minister, if the minister had been to any of the campuses which had been experiencing student protests. And then my second question was around that issue of, we can almost predict with certainty that in 2024, at the start of the academic year, the problems that we are dealing with now are still going to be the problems in 2024 of NEFSA's funding, paying late, and other similar issues that students raise on a yearly basis. So what is it that needs to be done to find permanent solution to these issues which create unrest in our institutions of higher learning? That was my question, Chairperson. But then lastly, I don't know when are we going to get some of the vice chancellors maybe to come so that we also get an opportunity to engage with them and ask them questions for some of the decisions that they make, particularly around student protests. For example, I spoke about this even in the previous meeting that we had, Chairperson, that the Vice Chancellor there at UKZN, before the student could even go out and protest, they tried to engage him, but he closed off all doors, avenues for engagement, which left students with no option but to go to the streets and protest. And then he brings in the big guns and all of that to intimidate and to shoot students. So those kind of issues, Chairperson, we need vice chancellors to come here so that they give us an explanation into some of these decisions that they are making, including the one of the suspension of the president of the SRC, the adverse. Those issues, Chairperson, because if we don't deal with those issues, they have the potential to flare up and inflame, students into more protests and so on and so on. So I think we should get our vice chancellors here, and we also engage with them, Chairperson. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mukhale. Honorable Boshoff.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Let me just lower my hand while I'm thinking about it. I just want to know from the TVET sector, with some of the institutions where there were problems, detail were given which campuses, but with some not. I'm primarily concerned with the Northern Cape, as it is in my constitution. I would just like to know if they could provide the information which of the campuses of the Northern Cape Rural College, because Kuruman, Katuda, Uppington and Springbok, they are very far away from each other, and one would maybe be in a position to do a single member oversight. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Boshoff. Honorable Machesi.
Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry, Chair. I'm also having network problems from Acacia. Can you hear me? Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Chair, I just want to find from the TVET sector, You know, I'm actually, just one question that I always forget to ask is that why is the TVET sector still using textbooks when, you know, I think basic education is looking at going online, you know, providing textbooks from online. Why is it that the TVET college is still, you know, looking at, you know, providing textbooks? Is there a plan? Is there, you know, at some stage to actually move away from textbooks? And also, you know, when we went on our oversight, we also saw that, you know, they are still using the old boards, like writing board and chalk, when basic education is moving away from that. I just want to find out, like, you know, is there, you know, like, because it's a bit frustrating for a learner that has moved from basic education that was using, I don't know if basic education is already on online textbooks, but can you imagine if you're moving from that and then you go to TVET college, you register and only to find out, like, you know, you're going, you know, you're going back in terms of technology. Is there a way that, you know, that TVET colleges can kind of move just in the same pace as basic education is moving? Because it's like a regression if you're going to TVET colleges and finding that, like, they're still using a normal board, a normal chalk, like a, you know, a chalk instead of, like, you know, everything being done like digitally and online. So I want to find out about those plans. And also, maybe now that the DM is on, I just want to find out, when was when did the NSFAS and the department start negotiating the new policy of capping of accommodation? When was it done, or was it just rolled out? And now that, you know, there are protests, now there's an initiative to kind of you know, have discussions and negotiations. Because I just want to find, like, you know, when a policy like that is going to be rolled out, is there a way that, like, can be rolled out way before the new academic year starts? Because obviously this is basically impacting the entire value chain of institutions, because now students don't have accommodation, and now there's kind of a, you know, a standstill whereby the department is saying, like, you know, as a church, this is where we are. This is what we, you know, we are willing to pay. And also the service providers as well, and also universities now are coming up and going, like, but we are not gonna give the students accommodation until this has been resolved. Is there a way that this kind of negotiations can happen before the academic year, or, like, in this case, when did they actually, you know, take place? And also, like, you know, is because, like, also ourselves, we're told by NSFAS that it's going to be rolled out, but at the same time, when we, as a Democratic Alliance, we said it's not going to work. I think it was already too late by that time. But, like, is there a way that this can be, you know, this kind of negotiations can be done prior, and also make sure that all stakeholders agree on this, on whatever policy that is coming from the department or even NSFAS? Because, like, if you also look at the provinces whereby there are protests, it's all those universities that are in metros. In the Free State, you're not having this kind of issues, because if the 45,000 rand, it fits the private sector very well. You know, it fits the off-campus accommodation quite well, because if they were to look at the increment of, should it been inflation related kind of increment, they would have still been fine without having to, you know, to have any protests. Because I think that's how the department has done over the years, to say, okay, based on inflation, therefore we're going to increase the accommodation to this much. So, and as I'm saying, like, you know, it is an issue that, like, you know, not all provinces are unhappy about the 45,000 rand. per annum. It's those universities that are impacted whereby accommodation is more expensive than in smaller provinces. So I just need to have a response just on those questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Machesi. Honorable King.
Thank you, Chairperson. I have been largely covered, Chairperson, with regard to the concerns. My issue is that we've noticed that over the years, the subsidy funding to universities in real terms have not really increased that much. And we've seen that NSFAS has increased tremendously, which then places huge strain on universities with regards to offering space. And then it also forces universities then to increase tuition and accommodation fee, which then obviously will have a spiral effect where the NSFAS will obviously have to increase because they would need to satisfy to get that 1-point-something million students access to institutions. So that is a major concern. But Chairperson, we also need to be mindful that expectations were created when fee-free higher education came into play, because now students are having this expectation that everything must be covered. Some just rock up at institutions and still expect that to be covered. So it is vital important, Chair, that the comprehensive funding model be discussed, being it in a draft form with the committee, to satisfy us that going forward, that the funding for institutions and for students will be feasible as we may move on into the other years. Also, which is of concern to me, Chair, is the hijacking by workers and unions when it comes to student issues, because that is, we've been seeing that happening year on and year on. And these poor young students are then in a situation where they will now be subjected to abuse and manipulation by the workers. And hence we see some of them doing things they're not supposed to be doing, ending up being suspended. But we also need to open up the rules of engagement with the institutions on student suspensions and with the SRC. So I'm really asking that as we go along, Chair, that we need to look at a platform where we bring all these role plays together under one roof with us, and we have like a commission or something, and we have discussions around these issues before it happens again, because every year this is like a normal occurrence. It becomes second nature. And then lastly, Chairperson, NSFAS has indicated that they had a shortfall, especially with regard to TVET colleges. I just need to find out, has the shortfall been covered, or what measures are then in place to cover the shortfall of NSFAS as we move forward into the academic year. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Honorable King. Honorable Itia, you had your hand up. I don't see it anymore.
Apologies, Chair. I think it might have went down when we had the technical issues.
Okay.
But I still have issues to raise.
Okay, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. Apologies for that. Good day to everyone. USAf, SAPCO, the department, yourselves, honorable members, and everybody else on the platform. Chair, let's welcome the presentations from the different stakeholders or role players in the sector, the department, as led by DDG Sokiko and DDG Zungu. Obviously, the overall leader, they've been the DG and the DM. Let's welcome the presentation from USAf and SAPCO. When USAf was presenting, well, actually at the beginning of their presentation, they reported that universities have filled spaces which they had offered to students who are NSFAS funded, who were still awaiting a funding decision from
from NSFAS. And that is one of the reasons why we have the instability in the system. Let's recap a little bit, Chair. It was in this committee where, I can't remember the exact date, but it must have been on the 16th of November or the 23rd of November, where we had USAf, NSFAS, and the department. It was a physical meeting in Max Building, where we expressed a view that when a decision or funding decisions take long to be made, universities, and the CEO of USAF was present physically in that meeting, universities must not exclude those students. We said those stakeholders must find a mechanism to not exclude those students. Now, I'm worried that USAF says they've, literally they've now excluded those students from entering the university space, because those spaces were now taken by those who can afford. What does this mean, Chair? It means those who did not have money to pay up front to secure those spaces, the poor and the middle class, have now been excluded, which is a problem, something that cannot be accepted. Now, I want to ask USAF, because NSFAS is not on the platform. Did they have discussions with NSFAS on these students? And I know there are technical reasons why some of them may not have been funded on time. We've had a number of meetings where NSFAS says sometimes we take long because universities do not give us the data of the students on time. The universities will say sometimes we can't afford not to fill these spaces because we're not sure if a student is provisionally funded, if they will be funded throughout the year. And with the issues of historic debt, it's a risk too much for us to take and all of that. That is granted. That is something we understand. Now, we can't, Chair, allow a situation where students would have traveled, some of them from the Eastern Cape to UJ or to TVET, and they arrive there, they are told that their spaces have been taken. Some of them don't even have money to go back. Some of them have traveled from Cape Town to Bloem, and they don't have money to go back. And we accept an explanation that no, those spaces were filled. By who? By those who had money. So this is a technical exclusion of the poor, something I think, Chair, we must not accept. And therefore, I want to make a suggestion, a plea that USAF engage their university vice chancellors and the registrars to look at how many per institution, how many learners per course are affected. You might find, Chair, in some courses, in some institutions, it's only 2 or 3 or 5. will the university really struggle if they take 5 learners extra in that class in order to address this problem of technical exclusion for the poor? That's because they were waiting for NSFAS. So I want to suggest that USAf engage with the university vice chancellors and they look at the possibilities of resolving this impasse by accepting an extra 3 or 5 per class. And let's see how many are they who are affected by this problem. USAf also spoke on accommodation, student accommodation cap as introduced by NSFAS. They spoke that they've had and they are continuing to have engagement with DHET, the ministry, and the providers. Are they saying to us that they are not having engagement with NSFAS? They've not had engagement with NSFAS. If they had engagement with NSFAS, when did that start? Because I know for a fact, I was present physically in that meeting when NSFAS announced in the presence of USAf this accommodation, student accommodation cap of 45,000 rand per annum. But I want to understand when exactly did they start engaging on this issue? Because it should have been on the 16th of November, 2022, or the 23rd of November. One of those meetings, Chair, you remember we're in Max Building when this happened. So USAf can't say they heard about it this year or at least that time. Could have been the first time they heard about it. And can they assist us? Maybe we must also write to NSFAS that they must also provide with us when did they start engagement with the universities, with USAf on this issue. USAf also spoke about extra things that comes with student accommodation and that it's not necessarily the size of the room, it's what comes with these student accommodations, things like gyms, computer labs, tennis court, etc. And I hope they're still on the platform, Chair. I'm then proposing that USAf, we can even give them 14 days, Chair. 7 days might not be enough for the kind of data I'm going to request that they provide us with. Student accommodation, per student accommodation, area by area, institution by institution. This is information that I'm requesting them to give it to us in writing. That one, for an example, at VETs, they have student accommodation A. And student accommodation A provides this kind of service over and above the student bed. They have a tennis court in this rest. They have a swimming pool, whatever. They have a computer lab. They have a gym. They have all these kind of things that they mentioned. Student accommodation per student accommodation. Over and above that, we must then put how much is being charged per room to these students. And this must be done by all institutions. Like I said, we're giving USAf, we can give them 14 days, Chair, to compile this and submit it to us. Today is the 8th, so they can submit it to us on the 22nd of March at the very latest. Because I'm still not convinced, Chair, that we are getting value for money on student accommodation. Hence, I'm giving them an opportunity to prove me wrong. Student accommodation by student accommodation, be it address or university owned or privately owned. So this is the information we're requiring. I'm still convinced, Chair, that we should not be paying, or students should not be paying more for student accommodation than those who are in the same area but staying at the residential arrangement. I'm still not convinced, over and above the fact that education is a social good, as you sometimes put it. It's a social good, and therefore we should not be paying exorbitant fees for social goods anywhere else. I'm sure, Chair, well, I've not done that study, but if we were to check with other countries, I don't think student accommodation anywhere else in the world would be more than those who are in residential areas, who are necessarily workers and all of that, in neighboring places next to student accommodation. I'm still not convinced. Like I'm saying, I've not done that study, but I don't think that happens. I believe that this probably happens only here in South Africa. So let USAf provide us with that data, and if they do not understand, then maybe they can ask our committee secretary. We can write it to them to provide X, Y, and Z if they don't understand, because we want, for an example, they must say Res BA, university owned, charges 5,000 rands per month. And these are the things that are coming with the residents. Then they go to Res Litsi at this institution. These are the things, extra things that they have. They have a gym, they don't have a gym, they have a swimming pool, they don't have, and all of those things. And this is how much a university owned res charges. Then they go to cultural residence owned by a private person. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is how much they are charging. I'm going with that information, Chair. We are going to show USAf that there's a problem with student accommodation and how they are being, how how they are charging students. With that information, that will come from them, because we'll show them Res A that has 1, 2, 3, 4 charges this much, and Res E that does not have 1, 2, 3, 4 charges more than Res A. And we can't allow that to happen, because the assumption is that this affects NSFAS students and therefore government must pay. It's not. There are a number of postgraduate students who are self-funded. There are a number of undergraduate students who are self-funded, who are affected by these things. And if we don't put in mechanisms to protect them as well, then we're in trouble, because we will be excluding them from staying at rest in a conducive environment for them to study. And that might affect the throughput rate, or how much, how quicker they progress moving forward. Because if there's no conducive environment, it's very difficult for one to pass. And I'm speaking here, somebody who have stayed off campus, not in a rest, and somebody who also stayed at the residence. So can they please provide us with that information? And over and above that, we will go to those areas, Chair, and get how much is a bachelor flat there, non-student accommodation. Some of them maybe 2-bedroom flats. If they give us a student accommodation in Braamfontein, for an example, we will go to Braamfontein and get the residential and show them that this is how much rent per square meter is being charged here. With 2-bedroom, this size per bedroom, 2 bathrooms, 2 showers, a living room, a kitchen that is fully furnished with a stove and all of those things. And then maybe we must have another discussion with them, because I believe that we have a problem of collusion between student accommodation providers and some of our institutions. Price fixing of some sort. And when we write to NSFAS, we must ask them, how far are they? Because it was in one of our meetings where we agreed with them that they must approach the Competition Commission and report this unethical behavior of some of these student accommodation providers. So we must ask them, how far are they as far as those that thing is concerned. Now, department, I want to understand how are you working with all stakeholders, NSFAS, maybe Competition Commission, universities, TVETs as well, to begin to regulate the price of student accommodation in South Africa. Like I've said, because I believe there's serious exploitation of students by these private accommodators and to a certain extent some university residences. Also, there are unaccredited providers. The DDG Zungu of TVET indicated that there was a learner who was raped recently in one of the TVET colleges, who was staying in an unaccredited outside residence, which was not conducive for students to stay in. So how do we make sure that NSFAS, no, I'm asking the department, how do you make sure that these unaccredited providers give value for money to our children? Yeah, maybe let me leave that one at that point. Department, Honorable Chair, Honorable Mkwacha spoke about bargaining, the usage of certain words like ringleaders and all of that, which I also have a problem with. But I want to ask the DGCC, how do you as a department ensure that the students' best interest is served after they were suspended or after or during their suspension and after their suspensions are lifted? How do we make sure that the best interest of these students is served? Here, I mean, Chair, there are instances where students would have been suspended, and after going through DC, the university realizes that they had suspended the wrong student, or they suspended the student wrongly. What support mechanisms are put in place to make sure that the mental health of such students is addressed So the department and USAf can assist us in that regard. So now I want to ask USAf the last question, Chair. What is their position on what I call exploitation of students by private accommodation? Because I believe that they charge exorbitant fees. Is USAf of the view that the prices that this student accommodation providers charge per student is justifiable, all of them? If no, do they have, which ones do they think are charging our students exorbitant fees? And what is it that they would have done in order to protect those students? Like I said, be it NSFAS or self-funded students. I'm not sure, Chair, I think I might have covered all my issues. Like I said, if I've forgotten some, then because we don't have time, but if I've forgotten some, yeah, then so be it. But I think I've covered all. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Honorable Litier. Sorry, I just was finishing off a note there. Thank you very much, Honorable Litier, and thank you very much to all colleagues and to all honorable members for your questions, comments, recommendations. I think, Honorable Litier, you covered me with USAf. USAF's position is quite clear. I think USAf just outrightly rejects the cap. I think that's what USAF is saying. And I think in this position, ours as a committee, I guess, as much as we've been quite clear on our stance as well, to say we support the regulation of student accommodation prices. But I think what will assist us here is facts, is research. NSFAS was requested by the committee. In fact, when I went as on my individual member oversight, the Tuesday before our committee meeting when NSFAS was there, about 2 weeks ago, I think. Anele, you'll help me with the date. But I think it was about 2 weeks ago. I raised this issue around communicating the data, communicating the research. What informs NSFAS putting this cap? And so why should we have a cap? Why is it 45,000 Rand? Putting that information out clearly. We don't have it as the committee. We asked for that research. We don't have it till today. We asked for NSFAS to work on its communication to society. I'm not sure. I mean, it clearly seems like there's still a disjuncture. And therefore, I think what we also need is thorough research from USAf, substantiating their stance that the cap is unjustified. So I think we need to have a meeting between USAf, NSFAS, and private accommodation service providers for everyone to state their case. I think that's the only way we can resolve this matter. And maybe, and this is where the work that we want to see by the department and NSFAS working or reaching out to the Competition Commission really will also assist us, right? And we need timeframes on this. How far are we? In the last meeting we had 2 weeks ago, we said, can you guys reach out to the Competition Commission? Can you give us an update on that, on whether or not you have a plan in place? So dates. So we have written, so far, Chair, or committee, we've written to the Competition Commission. We are waiting a meeting with them. Or so far, we are collating the information that we need to write our letter to the Competition Commission. Or, where are we with that? Because I think when we say we intend on reaching out to the Competition Commission, I think we are at a point now, because what we're not understanding, colleagues, that while all of us fight, us big guns, us, the elephants, the powerhouses in the sector, the departments vis-a-vis the universities, vis-a-vis private sector, which is capital. While we are doing this fighting at the top here, there's an idiom, I'm very bad with idioms, but I think there's an idiom that says, while the elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. So while we are fighting at the top here, it's students who today must be in temporary accommodation spaces in halls where they are being funded through initiatives by various student formations and SRC, them feeding them trying to make sure that these students on a day-to-day basis can get to school, but it's unsustainable, it's not conducive. And we will be shocked again when these students fail the first term, and then it'll even impact the funding that they are supposed to be receiving from NSFAS or from wherever. Then again, we're gonna say, no, they've been academically, again, we're gonna make it the students' fault that they did not have housing. So while we are unable to convince one another and find resolve and common ground on this matter, students are getting affected every day. So we need to move hastily on this matter. And, look, because I have my own views. I have my own views as to why can't, there's a lot of conversation on the state having to top up. Why can't universities top up? Why can't private sector, why can't capital make the sacrifice? President Ramaphosa always speaks about a social compact, us all coming together to try and strengthen efforts to develop this country. But I'm not seeing that give in or that willingness by private sector and our institutions. I don't feel like we're working with universities that believe that they are part of the same sector, that we are one differentiated whole. And this is where, again, this issue on institutional autonomy is again a hindrance. The concerns around cooperative governance are again popping up. So I think the best way to do this is to have this information come forth. The research from USAf that substantiates their stance, the research from NSFAS that substantiates its stance, the research from private sector, I don't know, there's a structure we're told that represents private accommodation service providers. For it to bring forth its stance, we need thorough dates and targets on the work we're doing with the Competition Commission. And if this, this data, DG, must be given to us, the plan in how we're going to work with the Competition Commission must be given to us within a week. And if you have any updates today, you can share those with us. And then I want to understand, Honorable Itzia was speaking about this, the communication and engagement between USAf, NSFAS, and even private sector service providers. Now, we've said that as far as we know as a committee, USAf and NSFAS engaged last year. We are also aware that NSFAS engaged this body that represents private sector, private accommodation service providers. And we've said that it must be much harder to engage these private accommodation service providers. But I mean, universities, are all affiliated to USAf, and so it should be much easier. Now, I think I also want confirmation from USAf as to whether or not that engagement did take place and what was the nature of the engagement. And from their perspective, what was the resolve of that meeting? And then if USAf has reflected on an alternative figure that they could put forth. So if they're saying 45 45,000 is too low. Okay, what are you proposing to be a fair regulated cap? We cannot accept a situation where those who, and we must thank USAf for bringing this to our attention, of those who now want to increase the cap because of, we're seemingly dealing with a very problematic sector. Like, it's quite scary how disingenuous and greedy society is. I mean, we are saying the maximum should be 45K, or NSFAS is proposing that the maximum should be 45K. And others are saying, oh, well, okay, then let's increase it. And that's exactly what NSFAS was trying to address, because it was endless. So, because NSFAS will cover, because the state has an endless abundance of finances, and it doesn't. And with what we have, we need to find ways of ensuring that we do as much as we can. How do we better fund the TVET program, for example, which clearly has massive demand? Honorable Litia, you've covered me on the issue of registration in the sense of those who were awaiting their NSFAS outcomes and were going through an appeal process of NSFAS, now losing their placements in a university because they don't have the funds to register. And I don't think that can be the student's fault, particularly if the student has not even, if their status took long to be concluded, considering the fact that DBE took long, considering the fact that it took long to release the matric results, considering the fact that in the past, people have always complained that NSFAS closes its applications too early. NSFAS then this year extends its application period, and then now the rest of the sector is not ready to assist this intervention. So we're not ready to make sure that, okay, if NSFAS has done that, it means we're going to also have to make sure that we are ready to wait for those outcomes to come forth. So we're trying to help on the one hand, but the other side is not ready to catch. And that takes me back to now this intervention of catch. I've always been worried on whether or not we are getting enough data. So is there sufficient feed into the catch system to say, at this institution, there is space for X, Y, and Z, and therefore we can catch that student. I don't know. I would love to be brought into confidence if the system, if the relationship between the data from institutions of higher learning, from universities in particular, to the catch system is as succinct as we wanted. And then there's a sentiment, by students by and large, that there have been regressions on some concessions that have existed in the past. Let's take, for example, certification. There was at a time in the sector where there was agreement that if you cannot afford, or if you have student debts at the end of your qualification, you can request for the institution to send your results, your transcript, directly to your prospective employer, right? So so I've applied for a job at ABSA or at Litie Limited, and can you please can you kindly send them my results, right? But that seems to no longer be happening. There were various concessions made at different institutions to accommodate young people who would, for example, be saying, I'm waiting for my NSFAS outcome. So in the meantime, can I sign an AOD? But those sort of concessions seem to no longer exist. And that for me is very concerning. I'm also disappointed in the university programs, and that speaks both for USAf and the department in our ability to sort of, package our issues, seamlessly. I don't know. I don't know if it's a reflection of our relationship with vice chancellors. Maybe it's very hard, or universities, it's very hard for the feed of information to come to us succinctly. I don't know. But it's so hard to follow the various issues in the university program. I mean, what are local factors? At SPU, we say there are local factors that contributed to the unrest there. What are local factors? Are we talking about water and you know, matters like that? I don't understand why NSFAS is not ready for the direct payment method, because I think they had brought us into confidence last year during our working meeting. And I also want to understand which institutions, there's a lot of say that funded lists went to institutions late. Can we give an account if all institutions have received this information? And then there's other, then NSFAS says we haven't received registration data from institutions. Can we get confirmation that all our institutions have sent the registration data? Can we get indication of like allowances that have been sent to all institutions? Which institutions have we not received a registration data from, and therefore we've not been able to disperse allowances, you know, seamlessly? And I guess in that accord, those who have not sent the data must just send the data. And is there no way, and you know, it's unfortunate that NSFAS is not here today, but is there no way of making, maybe someone can explain to us why there is backlog on registration data being sent to NSFAS? Like, what's the process there? And then also, it would be nice to know that once the registration data has been sent to NSFAS, how long does it then take for allowances to be sent? And then, sorry, I just need to. Do we have an understanding of how many students at UWC and CPUT are still sleeping in the emergency accommodation that students had initiated, that student leadership had initiated? And what did management do? Did management also try and contribute to the, you know, ensuring that there's food security for those students? What did management do? Because I've heard a lot about what student leadership did to assist, but I'm not sure what management did. I think I'll leave it at that for now. And a big caution to us all is that we must never assume that when there's no student protest, there are no issues, because UCT protested some weeks ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and then it went quiet. And now last night, there was information circulating that UCT will be shutting down. And so it goes back to my challenge and crisis and concern with even NSFAS DG, that we don't close issues in this sector. We don't close them. We don't wrap them up neatly, you know? So these issues linger. As soon as we move on to the next one, and we don't make sure that we've dealt with the fire here, you know? And even with NSFAS, for example, there are so many cases that linger from one year to the other. And you sometimes find a situation where this student could have actually been assisted in this year now. So we couldn't assist them last year. Now everything is in order. We could be assisting them this year, but because the student didn't even know that they must reapply for this year, now we find ourselves with a never-ending case. And who gets affected? The student gets affected. I'm going to hand over to the department and our entities or our stakeholders to respond. And then we're going to give some very clear directives from the committee on what we would like to see happening over the next couple of days as part of committing ourselves to giving recommendations. yeah, to giving recommendations, because that has been our commitment as a committee, DG, that whilst we raise concerns, we really do want to be able to support the sector so that we are able to fulfill our mandate as a sector. Thank you, DG. DM indicated, colleagues, that he is currently attending to a program on gender-based violence. So he's attending a research endowment on gender-based violence and higher education at CPUT, and he has been asked to speak there. It started at 12 o'clock. So he sent an apology, but we are still with DG Sishi. So DG, we're gonna hand over to you and to colleagues, Dr. Matutu, as well as Prof. Putsisi. And then I'd just like to indicate to colleagues that we are due to be in the chambers at 3. We have questions to the ministers in the social cluster. So can we just be wary of time? What we cannot respond to in this meeting, if you can please respond to it in writing. If there's a need for just to afford you time, DG, maybe in Friday's meeting, you can delegate someone who may have time to just sharpshoot those issues that you really feel that you need to speak to. We can afford you time, but if you think that through the time we give you now and through the time we give you now and in writing, you'll be able to bring us into confidence, then that's fine. But we also want to be able to communicate as a portfolio committee what is being done. You know, I always say that the portfolio committee is a mouthpiece for citizens. So citizens will come to us and say, these are the concerns that we have, and we will narrate that to yourselves. But we also see ourselves as a communicator on your behalf to constituencies. So, you know, you giving us this clarity affords us the space to also go and say to concerned citizens, to parents, to students, that this is what we have been told the department and various stakeholders are doing to solve the issue. So it's also very important for us to have clarity on these matters that we are raising. Thank you, DG Sishi. Let me hand over to you.
Thank you very much. I thought perhaps I should allow Dr. Matutu as well as Professor Putsisi to start, and then I will take what is left of what they may not have covered, perhaps in that order, with your permission, Chair. Okay, let's start with, that's fine, DG. Let's start with Prof. Putsisi, and then we go to Dr. Matutu. Prof. Putsisi.
Thank you, Chairperson and honorable members. Let me address the questions that were raised by Honorable Mananiso regarding the engagement of municipalities at Coastal College, where there was a problem of water supply. Seemingly, it was an internal problem, not involving the municipality. It was just a burst pipe. It was fixed. Then the issues of Northern Cape Rural protesting, the report that we had received was that no campus in the Northern Cape province had protests. But if there are any, we can investigate and follow up on that matter. Honorable Makesi, why is the TVET sector still using textbooks? Is there a plan to digitalize the sector and even chalkboards? I think this is just a funding limitation issue. But we are continuously in discussions with the department to ensure that there is support. And we are also receiving support from the CETAs. There are colleges that have been in the different projects where CETAs are supporting digitization of the sector. But we will look into that, and also try and follow up on the funding mechanisms that could be explored in supporting our colleges. We also want to move away from that. But if I have to be interestingly, so at Motheo TVET College, we tried to give students electronic textbooks. They were quite not happy with us. They demanded back their hard-cover textbooks. They said it's difficult to read from a screen. But I think it's a matter of change management. The timeframes on our recommendations, we will be having a meeting with SAFETA next week. Our SG will communicate a date with them. We have already a communication between the two structures on the table. I think the other matters were around the meeting, the SAPCO monitoring the unrest. We will be on the ground also starting from next week, where the office bearers and the NEC members will be engaging with affected institutions. I think in a week or two, we will be able to produce a report that we'll share with the department in terms of the situation as it unfolds, whether matters are being resolved or not, and what further support is required. Other matters, Chair, on the recommendations are long-term issues such as expansion. It's quite a lengthy process. The additional funding required. We know that our minister and the department engaged Treasury in that regard. We will await the response from them, including the missing middle funding and student accommodation. But I would want us to maybe to engage with the department further in this regard, and maybe they will come back to the committee and give feedback in that regard together with us. Thank you, Chair. That would be our responses. Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Putsisi. I think there are some that you have not responded to, but you can, particularly mine, maybe you felt it was comments more than questions, but you can respond to some of them in writing. And if we can just also implore on yourselves for a proper investigation to be done at Capricorn. We visited Capricorn, Prof. Putsisi, and we did not expect to see what has unfolded. Capricorn inspired so much confidence. Yes, there were issues, for example, with their residences, but to be honest, we were inspired by Capricorn TVET College and even Vembe TVET College. So we were really disappointed to see that this is what had unfolded at Capricorn TVET College. And we are really hoping that the immediate issues can be addressed there in relation to NSFAS and the textbooks, and that in the investigations we do, that we do a thorough job, and that no one is victimized as proposed in the interventions there. But thank you, Prof. Putsisi. Dr.
Yes,
Matut.
Chair. Sorry, Chair, we will put those other responses in writing. Also, the issues of safety for students that were victimized around gender-based violence or so, and the infrastructure issues. We will put that in writing, Chair. Thanks.
And the challenges as to why we can't, the appetites for lecturers in our sector when there are so many unemployed citizens.
Yes, we'll address that, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Putsisi. And we wish you and your sector and all your principals all the best for the rest of the academic year.
Thank you, Chair.
Dr. Matutu.
Thank you very much, Chair and honorable members. I would like to acknowledge our Deputy Chairperson of the USAf board, Professor Francis Peterson, who's the Vice Chancellor at the University of the Free State, who is with us. So if there's anything that perhaps I've not responded to properly, I think Professor Peterson can come in. On the first issue, which was raised by Honorable Letio on the issue of students from NSFAS getting their results late. This is how universities manage the issue of registration. They make offers to students, firm offers to students, and they give them deadlines by which they should have accepted those offers. In the meantime, there are students who are on waiting lists. One student may apply to 6 different universities. So it's understood that just because a student has applied and you've provided the student with an offer doesn't mean that that student is going to your university. So after the deadline for acceptance of offers has lapsed, then universities go next on the list to look at other students who have applied who were on the waiting list, and they accept those students. So what happened in this particular instance is that universities had 2 different approaches. There are those who looked at applicants from NSFAS without hearing what the results were going to be. They just accepted and registered those students automatically without even knowing whether NSFAS is taking them or not. So that was a risk on those students that they took, which meant that when the results came and the student was not financially accepted, then they had to look at their registration process. There are others which looked at the next set of applicants and accepted those applicants. So what happens to those is that when the results came from the NSFAS, they had to over-enroll. That is the situation that they are in right now. And that comes with penalties, and that comes with inefficiencies within the system. I had to highlight that because it is a reality for some institutions. And there's no intention of excluding students on the basis of affordability of higher education, but it is a reality that the approaches that different universities took in order to ensure that they have the appropriate enrollment numbers, and they are coming from a history of having under-enrolled as a consequence of the juggling at the beginning of the year and all these problems that we are talking about. There has been under-enrollment in about 16 universities, resulting in penalties being paid by those universities. So that is just an issue I needed to clarify. Otherwise, there's no intention of universities to exclude financially needy students because of the fact that they are late. Then on the issue of capping, I have to mention very clear that universities, together with University of South Africa, have got no objection whatsoever to capping. However, a single cap is not going to work for all universities. This current cap of 45,000 Rand for accommodation without food and 60,000 Rand for accommodation together with food has worked for 10 universities. Hence, they are not appealing the cap. And I've mentioned some of the ramifications of that for at least one university where they have outlined that now service providers want to raise their funds to more than this amount that they have been charging all along. So that is one. The other one is that for 15 universities, in one way or another, the cap is not working, and 10 have made submissions to NSFAS. And our expectation is that the data that Honorable Letia is asking USAf to produce is the same data that NSFAS should have produced and made a decision on the basis of before providing the cap. And we expect the cap can't be a single cap throughout the country. It has to be based on research, and at the same time, it has to be based on input costs, we agree. So we have no intention, we have no collusion with external service providers. All that we are saying, let's look at the realistic cap. NSFAS has got the appeal letters. The same data that I am outlining here is what they have with them. So the same data that they should have put together in order to make a decision is the data that we are talking about. So I would plead with the committee that when it comes to issues of capping, they get NSFAS to deal with issues of capping. Otherwise, we're going to find universities being directed from all angles and being asked data from all angles. There's a task team which has been set by the Minister of Higher Education and Training. That task team is going to ask universities data. There is NSFAS. NSFAS is going to ask universities data. So now to add USAf to the mix, I don't think is a fair issue, both on the part of USAf and on the part of the universities. So I do think that perhaps let's give the task team, which has been appointed by Minister Nzimande, a chance, and let's give NSFAS a chance so that we can be able to deal with this issue comprehensively. Otherwise, this is a study, as far as I'm concerned, which should have been done prior to putting the caps on. And it's not a 5-day or 2-day kind of thing, because we know we are housing thousands and thousands of students. So on the part of the engagement of USAf, NSFAS has engaged USAf. On the 5th and the 6th of October, there was engagement between NSFAS and USAf. And what USAf is saying is that we are in support of the cap, but a single cap for the entire country is not going to work. What we need, or we said to NSFAS, is that let this issue be tested on a few institutions and see how it works. And it has to be based on research, which has to be conducted by NSFAS ahead of putting the cap there. So that is the other issue. And then on the issue of certification, we are aware of the fact that USAf has taken a decision that when students are owing universities money, what needs to happen is that those universities should provide the student with their academic records. They should provide the potential employer with a confirmation letter, which is saying that this student has done everything they qualify for this particular qualification. And we are in support of them applying anywhere else. What then the university keeps is a parchment. So the actual certificate is what the university keeps, and with the intention of recovering the funds that the student owes from the student. And on the issue of universities being able to pay the difference between the cap and what the real cost of accommodation is, that depends on the financial viability of the institutions. There may be institutions which can afford that difference, and there are those which are very clear that they cannot afford that difference. And that difference may be small for some, and it can be huge for some institutions. So it's not a matter of universities just deciding that we can't afford the cap. Some universities have even started fundraising for this difference, but the amount of money they've raised funds on is so small compared to what is required. I'm not sure, Chair, if I have covered all the issues that were asked. Professor Peterson, I'm wondering if there's anything that you'd like to add to what I've said.
Thank you, Dr. Matutu, and through you, Honourable Chair and Honourable Members. I think you covered most of the questions fairly well, CEO. I just want to make another addition to the residences. Residences, and I think that's a practice that's been accepted within the system, are being treated as entities that should be self-sustainable, and therefore should not necessarily be subsidized by the universities. And the way that universities are managing residences is with that specific modeling approach, where we look at residents as self-sustainable entities. With respect to the differences, I think one of the honourable members asked that the difference between the cap and what the actual cost is per institution, as you have said correctly, that would be different to different institutions. But why should universities or institutions not come in and fill that gap? I think to a certain extent, as you indicated, where they can afford it, they can. But I just wanted to say that a lot of our contribution across university sector for students in terms of subsidizing tuition, specifically the missing middle in bursaries, come from bursary funding that the universities are putting forward. In the case of the University of the Free State, for instance, we got about over 120 million that we add from the university coffers to assist students with bursary funding. And I think we must not forget that. So the contributions that come from the universities in terms of adding is not only in one dimension of where there's a need, but it's also, it cuts across other areas besides the accommodation. So I thought, Chair, I just wanted to add those two, but otherwise I think Dr. Matutu has covered the questions fairly well. Thank you.
Okay, I guess that brings us to the end of the input or responses from USAf. Thank you very much, Dr. Matutu, as well as Mr. Peterson. Is it Dr. Peterson? You know, academics get very offended when you when you don't call them by their academic titles. But thank you, Mr. Peterson. You'll pardon me if you are Dr.
Professor Peterson.
Thanks, Dr. Matute. So thank you very much, Prof. Peterson.
Thank you, Chair.
I'd like to then hand over to the DG, Dr. Sishi.
Chair, just before
I've noted your comments, Honorability. I'm coming to, unless you would like to raise them yourself.
Please, just 1 second.
Okay, that's fine. You may continue.
No, thanks, Chair. I was saying the response of Dr. Matutu of USAf to my first question, I feel like it's not sufficient because, like I wrote on the group, that I can give her an example of one of what I was talking about. That this student is literally being excluded academically excluded on the basis that they could not have money to register on time. They were offered a space, and I know this is not the only case, but I'm just making an example of this one. Offered a space, accepted but could not register. So they've accepted. It's not a matter of whether they had applied in 10 universities or not. They had accepted, but NSFAS took long. So that child can't access university now. So that is a point I was making earlier on. And number two, USAf can't say they don't support a blanket capping or blanket approach, and then they then come to us and say they don't have this data or they don't have time to compile this data. What made them get to a point that they don't support a blanket? Why? You know, I'm not satisfied, Chair. And I've suggested to them that let them give us this data and say, this is what made us not support the blanket approach of 45,000 cap issue from NSFAS. But you can't then say you're not going to give us this data, because I feel like that's what the CEO of USAf was saying, that they're not going to give us this thing, and we must wait for the department or the ministry to come and brief us. And I think that is, and that should not be acceptable, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Itze. I was going to add your inputs to my closing remarks, but I afforded you an opportunity solely because I understand how frustrating this process is. And I would have added also in my closing remarks that there are definitely many cases of students who have lost their spot because they did not get a NSFAS outcome on time. I have a case of a student who I have been in constant communication with, and they even said to me, look, because I've been trying to push NSFAS to help the student and to get the outcome, they said to me, you know what, my parents are even thinking of going to Umashonisa in the meantime, just so that I can register, because I've got 2 offers. And by the way, I will take an offer based on the cost of the registration fee. So if NSFAS is funding me, it doesn't really matter which offer I take. But because I want to take, my parents don't have money, and therefore I will take the institution with the lower registration fee, or what do you call it, initial payment. For me, it's really semantics if you say initial payment or registration, because ultimately you can't register without that payment being made. So there are cases. We know of a case of a student not so long ago who also lost his spot. He now has NSFAS, but he doesn't have a spot anymore. So there are many cases that we can refer to. But anyway, DG Sishi, you can hand over to you, DG Sishi, as well as your 2 DDGs. Thanks, DG.
Thank you very much, Chair. Honorable members, good afternoon to you. As usual, a very, very productive session we've had of the Portfolio Committee. Thanking you, Chair, for your leadership in this regard, and appreciating the presentations made by the colleagues from the SAPCO, Professor Pusitsi. I thought that the response was quite detailed, and clearly, Chair, it complements the presentation by the department. And I think in as far as the presentation by USAf, it is clear to me that where there are gaps between information provided today and the information that that was presented today by the department and what was presented by the official from USAf. is a reflection of the fact that we already have met. We've already have identified the key issues, and we've already agreed on the mechanisms to deal with these issues. And the smaller team of the department and USAf is scheduled to meet to identify these issues. And I'm very happy that USAf has clarified the fact that the universities do not reject the cap. And therefore, I think it's important that in as much as we respect our universities, we also need to equally afford NSFAS the same kind of regard, you know, and give them an opportunity to respond to some of the issues that were raised around the cap. It was very clear to us when we met that the NSFAS would argue that their proposed caps are evidence-based, and equally USAF supports an evidence-based approach to capping. Therefore, we thought it is going to be possible to look into what could be done to improve in these issues. We'll definitely guide that process because there's no vacuum. Whilst we're discussing this, the existing cap is in place. And our discussions will take their own time and life. And as this happens, in place is a cap which is in place. And I think it's important that this is understood, that NSFAS as a board and whatever proposals that are made, they have to go through a due process of governance within that institutions. It is our duty as a department to making sure that these things are done properly. We are therefore looking forward to the conversations with all these role players to ensure that what the solutions that are possible for us in the interest of our students, are arrived at. Allow me, Chair, to be specific about some of the questions that were raised by our honorable members, starting with your own comments around career advisory services within the department. Noted, Chairperson, those comments are valid. We definitely need to improve the career guidance and advisory services in the system. But the work that has been done by that unit so far shows a good potential that could be of use to students. Honorable Tebogo Letsia has indicated that there are two issues that are major, and I think I need to respond to those. Around those students that are on suspension, to say what are the interventions that by the department to deal with this. As you know, we've got a dedicated higher health, a program that is prevalent in all our institutions. Its footprint is not only in universities, but it is in all our colleges. When we are called upon to respond to the needs of our students in this regard, we are able to intervene comprehensively. I also wish to indicate that as a department, we are observing very closely the response by management at our universities regarding these strikes. And we are observing them, and one of these days at an appropriate time when we are satisfied that their due processes have been followed as a department, we will make a call, about, our observations in this regard. We certainly believe that many of our universities needs to be encouraged to engage more progressively and more, comprehensively with a student representative council to revive institutional forums in the institutions to ensure that there is a culture of engagement within institutions. Surely it can't be correct that at slightest provocation, the most drastic measures are applied. These are matters which in our smaller group, between ourselves and representatives from our institutions, we will discuss. And I trust and have confidence that we will be able to reach an amicable, a point where in future, when we are confronted with these issues, we don't see what we have seen in some of the institutions that were referred to in the input made by the chairperson. Definitely, we are going to make a statement about these issues, but we do wish to satisfy ourselves that institutions have exhausted their internal processes before we make any comment about what we think of such processes and how do we improve those processes going forward. It is important for us to do so because it is in the interest of our institutions and the post-school education and training system that governance is underpinned by democratic principles. And these are really important to us. Our institutions, I repeat, must be arenas for intellectual engagements, not platforms for all sorts of issues that have distracted us from actually focusing on the priorities of the sector. And I think this is really important. And I need to say this, Honorable Letsiya, in response to your question about the response of the department regarding the students that are affected. I think it's going to be very important. May I indicate that in selected institutions where we have identified the an intense level of tensions, we have deployed senior officials. Today, my DDG for planning was at VETS and UJ. Yesterday, the DDG for university education was at VETS universities as well. From the beginning of the academic year, we have deployed the entire department, Honorable Tapelo Mukhale, the entire department as directed by both our minister and the deputy minister to ensure the presence of the department and in support of our institutions to deal with these matters. And I think the report that has been tabled before us today clarifies this issue. As you have seen, we speak about in all 26 universities that there's possibly only one universities that our teams may not have visited. Our minister has been all over. You know that predominantly the issue that has been covered, that has dominated our universities has been the issue of security of our vice chancellors and management in these institutions that emanated from the incidents at 4 universities. I think it is public knowledge, Honorable Mkhale, that our minister was not only present, but he has met councils, he has discussed with unions and other stakeholders, including student representative councils, some of these issues. And throughout the rest of other institutions, our deputy minister and senior executives in the department have been, all in all of these institutions, and we have a report ready to be tabled on our observations. And some of these visits coincided with the visits of the portfolio committee, and so it is a fact that the department prioritizes engaging our institutions. In your meeting yesterday with the South as well as SAPCO, it was very clear and it was indicated that we are engaged. The students themselves confirm this, because this is how the minister would like us to work, to be engaged and to be, present in our institutions. Honorable Sibia, we take your point, and I think you argue that different markets require different and diverse approaches, which somehow is what NSFAS has argued, that their capping system is informed by consideration of a variety of data sets and evidence that is before them. Quite clearly, this is an ongoing kind of work we may actually need in future as we improve the current capping to sanction the dedicated research on comparative studies on how we could further improve this. It is not something you achieve on a single day, and therefore we have to work together with all our institutions in getting to deal with this. Honorable Mananiso, we embrace your proposal that we need a colloquium on sector policy and operational guidelines. This will be done, and we will be in contact with you to ensure that we are informed by your wisdom in this regard. We are, as you have indicated, going to make data available to the portfolio committee on the composition of the war room. And this is another instrument that is used by the department to stay ahead of what is going on in all of our institutions through our stakeholder management unit and our communications department. And we'll make this data available to you. On a daily basis, we get these reports that provide us this data that we're talking about. Obviously, you argue, Honorable Manani, so that the students' best interest, must be seen to be, prioritized, before the lifting of suspensions and after the lifting of institutions. And your views are aligned to the views raised by Honorable Tebogo Letsie regarding the very same issue. Otherwise, Chairperson, I'm covered by the responses, especially the responses by SAPCO, and the responses by USAf are the responses that I'm familiar with, because they've been very clear as we engage individually with our universities. We might differ in terms of how many universities think this way or that way. Others would like to reserve their right to their own opinion about the cap as well, but at the end of the day, I think it is quite correct that there are institutions that are fully, and there are many of them, fully in support of the current cap. But we accept the fact that there are those. Even if there was one institution that didn't support it, we will still be willing and ready to engage them up until we find the solutions. I think our experience in policy development and policy implementation have taught us that every policy decision will have exceptions, and it is important for us to, lift our instruments for engaging with exceptional issues emanating from the policy implementation. So when those exceptional cases are read, it does not mean there's a crisis in the sector. It just means that there are certain pockets within the system that are affected differently. Our concern as a department is all of our students. Even if there's one student that is affected by the issues of accommodation, we will equally afford that matter the same kind of seriousness that the minister has shown in pulling together USAf and other stakeholders in engaging over these issues. Chairperson, your earlier comments at the beginning of the meeting around your opportunity to engage the comprehensive student funding model is going to be communicated to our minister so that we facilitate that opportunity. As far as I know, there is absolutely no intention to deny our portfolio committee an opportunity to engage on such an important matter. And our minister will definitely be very happy to participate in an engagement of that nature. We'll also be very happy that we go to cabinet having engaged with our portfolio committee in respect of one of the most important initiatives of our minister. It is very clear from our presentations today that the presentation of our department caters for our short-term measures in dealing with what are the issues pertaining and affecting a few of our universities that is important to us. But at the same time, we understand that where there is quiet and compliance, it doesn't mean that stakeholders are satisfied. And therefore, there is a need for us to work in a much more intense manner with our institutions so that we understand their views and we mobilize the collective view of the sector to take the sector forward. We thank you, Chair, for your leadership and for your guidance in this. Your passion for education, it really inspires us. But this is a complex matter that has a lot of stakeholders, including students, divided in terms of what actually their views are on the matter. How we handle it requires, the approach that the minister has adopted of meeting stakeholders, identifying working groups to tackle specialized issues so that we come up with solutions that will improve on the current regime of our policies. Thank you very much for the opportunity today.
Thank you very much, DG. Can I just check, DG? I know no one is supposed to speak after you. Can I just check from our DDGs if there's no last remark before I hand over to the DM, if that's okay with you, DG?
You're welcome, Chair.
All right, thank you. DDG Socikwa?
Thank you, Chair. I'm good. I think the DG has covered me fully. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, DDG Zungu?
No, thank you, Chair. Indeed, I think the DG did cover most of the items. Maybe I can just make one addition. I know the question was directed to SAPCO in relation to the colleges failing to attract the requisite skills, particularly around the lecturers. I think one of the challenges, not just in the lecturing staff, but in other areas, for instance, particularly when it comes to the technical or engineering fields, because we have to compete with the industry in this regard. So people will opt, either they go and work for industry or they come and teach. We still in the process of developing programs that the universities are now offering to train and develop TVET lecturers. In the main, we attract people that come from industry, and then they are taken through the route of pedagogical or methodology to in teaching, which it's only then that we are able. Very, very difficult, particularly in the technical skills that we are able to attract the right and the requisite skills. It cuts across. Honorable Chair, you know that we have major findings in relation to the poor annual financial statements that are produced. Again, you'll find that we are unable to attract chartered accountants because of our conditions of service that can be matched to that of the industry. In some years back, and when I was still young as a junior lecturer as well, there was a discussion around the entry level for lecturers in the TVET sector, whether should it be created to the DBE at, post-level 1 teachers, as it is still the case now, or it should be, the entry level should be at post-level 2, so that we can be able to attract the requisite skills. Same as in the ICT, the reason for the poor data that sometimes you receive, it's attributed mainly to the lack of appropriate skills that we are able to attract in these institutions because of the conditions of service that can be matched to that of the industry. And I think that's one addition that I wanted to make, Honorable Chair. But with the question that you posed at the end in terms of the RESH data backlog, how long does it take once it's loaded? In this instance, where we have about 9 TVET colleges that are remaining, we have reached an agreement yesterday with NSFAS that as and when they receive the data, they will immediately process it so that we can catch up with that backlog and make sure that we kill the fires in these institutions. I must say, Chair, there has been some improvement because around March this year, we were sitting at about 48% of colleges that would have submitted data. To date, we are sitting at about 82% of the colleges that have already submitted. And I think there's a massive improvement in that regard. We, of course, will continue to improve in this regard, Chair. I think those would just be the only additions that I would probably want to make. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members and DG.
Thank you very much, DG Zumo, DG Socikwa, DG Sishi. I'd like to hand over to DM Manamela.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. As I indicated to you, that I had to be briefly excused because I was at the gender-based violence research in Daba, which was at CPUT. So I missed significantly the number of questions that the honorable members have raised. But I just want to emphasize a couple of points. The first point that I just want to emphasize is that the ministry, through the leadership of the minister and the department, remains committed to ensure that there's stability in the institutions where there are protests. And I think, as the DG has indicated, that we have our ear on the ground. We have senior officials from the department attending to the specific issues that have arisen and are providing support to university and TVET college managers and vice chancellors, but also giving an ear to the student leadership, and to help to, in some instances, mediate, where there's a crisis, and also where the door has been opened for mediation. But I must emphasize that in most of the cases, in most of the instances, the leadership of institutions at a management level, but also the SRC leadership, have indicated a high level of maturity, in amicably resolving the issues, and wherein, for instance, NSFAS is required or the department is required, we have responded positively in helping to resolve those issues. Those issues could either be, the capping issue that I think is one of the major issues in some of the institutions where there are protests, and even where there is no protest. And I think the details the DG together with the DDG have given in terms of how we're working together with USAf to identify those problems and resolve them. So I think I need to make that emphasis, that at a leadership level, through our minister and the department through our DG, we remain committed to work with institutions where there's signs of instability to try and resolve these issues. And we get periodic, twice a day actually, reports in terms of what's happening in our campuses. And we send teams, we inquire, and we provide support, in those instances to make sure that, learning and teaching is restored. And we really appreciate the concerns raised by members of the portfolio committee, in this regard. The second point, I think you and various members of the portfolio committee in the period I was listening in have raised some proposals in terms of what needs to be done. Proposals regarding the drive to alert students, especially those who are doing grade 12, in time, for them to apply in time. And I think we, in this regard, have to, look at our Apply Now campaign, and maybe in the future to brief the portfolio committee on this work and see how we can get members of the portfolio committee, either through their constituency offices or in whatever way, to help us to strengthen, this particular campaign. Thirdly, there will always be, incidents. I'm not suggesting that the system is perfect, and even if we wanted to suggest that, I think those incidents that we specifically zoomed into in our presentation and also in the opening remarks of the chair also shows that there are signs where the imperfections of the system have been exposed. But I think we also need to appreciate the fact that in the overall, and especially over the last few years, the teething problems and the crisis that usually like a blanket befell the post-school education and training system, that those problems have somewhat minimized. Our intention is obviously to ensure that the universities and TVET colleges open and seamlessly transition towards learning and teaching. And I think we've identified some of the challenges, that you've raised, that members of the portfolio committee have raised, and some of the challenges which we ourselves are aware of, and that hopefully, with time, we will have a situation wherein all our universities and all our TVET colleges reopen peacefully, and all the students are in lecture hall learning, which is the main and sole purpose why they go to universities. But thank you very much for this engagement. To all the members of the portfolio committee, and of course we're continuing with this engagement later this afternoon through the question and answer session in Parliament. But I think this engagement has been quite empowering for all of us. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, DM, and thank you very much to all colleagues who presented and engaged this morning. Overall, I think, look, to be honest, with the university program, DG, we're not inspiring confidence as a program. I mean, even yesterday, I said to SALS, you need to send us a written document. We have not received that written document. I don't know if it's because the issues are so rife in the sector and all the stakeholders in the university program are just overwhelmed. But I don't leave this meeting feeling very confident on what exactly we're doing to address the issues in the university program. This goes to the DG, to the DM, DDG Sokwikwa, and to Dr. Matutu. Yeah, even the document, I'm just sorry. Personally, I'm not confident. I think I have a little bit more hope in terms of the TVET program, and maybe because the issues there are huge, right? We ultimately need funding, but the day-to-day issues, there seems to be a better way of articulating what the issues are. Like for example, at CPUT, we're saying that there's a media clip that circulated with 90 students without accommodation and sleeping in a hallway. When we say the accommodation requests are being processed on a case-by-case basis, what's the figure we have now? So firstly, was the media clip correct? Or was it false? Did it give false information? I've been told by student leaders from there that they have a crisis and what they've been doing. What is management saying is happening now? Do we have 20 students who don't have accommodation? Do we have 20 students who are now in the emergency accommodation? I'm not getting that from the university program. And so I don't know what to say when I leave this meeting to constituents. And Dr. Matutu, there's a cry from the department to say, there's information that trickles in and there's an inability for us to verify data. To say, students are saying this is happening, management is saying this is what's happening, the committee is also of the view of whatever, the department is saying that, NSFAS is saying that. Can we please get our universities in check to at least be able to have stronger stakeholder relations so we all are on the same page? I'm honestly not clear on what we're doing in the university program and where we stand. Unfortunately, that's just how I feel coming out of this meeting. I want to then encourage as the first recommendation that can we please strengthen the data sharing amongst stakeholders? Can USAf please help us to coordinate the vice chancellors? The reason why we would ask Dr. Matutu, why we would ask USAf to assist, why we say USAF must get the data is because when we say USAF, we don't literally mean you, but we mean your institutions. We mean you are responsible for coordinating them. Yesterday we said to South, can South come and present a case-by-case issue of each university, what is happening from the student narrative, what are students saying is happening, so that today we can cross-reference that data with what management is saying is happening. And management must be able to feed USAF that data because USAF represents them. We don't have the capacity to all the time meet with every single institution. But yes, Honorable Mokhale, we must call in some of these VCs, and as an immediate action of the committee, we must write to all these universities that are of concern and get them to account directly to us, because clearly we're not able to get the information that we want through the department and through USAF, because maybe they are not giving them that information that they need to be able to report on their behalf. So we as a committee are now going to write directly to them. So that they can account directly to us. We also want to resolve that there's a need for a colloquium on cooperative governance in the PSET sector. We want to resolve that NSFAS must send us that research that informs their CAP must be sent to the committee with immediate effect, in fact, because I think they're late. And we expect the same from the universities. USAF consolidate the view of universities. If you are saying there's 10 that are saying this, 15 are saying that, consolidate that research and share it with the committee. And I mean, unless you yourselves don't want to be able to understand what all your universities are thinking, why they're thinking what they're thinking, we see you as a structure that can organize all these universities on our behalf. So we will expect research from NSFAS. NSFAS, what informed the CAP? If USAF is saying our universities are saying only 10 can do this, only 15 can say that, what informs that decision? Consolidate that data. It doesn't have to be USAF itself if it doesn't have the capacity doing that research, but you can surely coordinate that effort. I then want to move to the issues of NSFAS. I think we must just call in NSFAS to come and speak on for themselves, because I don't know what's happening there. Because, for example, there's a question we're asking on registration. It's not been answered. Registration data. Why is there all these disjunctures on the registration data? I think they must just come in and speak for themselves. They must tell us how many universities have not sent the data. All of that, they must come and speak, because I'm not getting that information also, because that's the information that we want. DT, we've just said that, yes, maybe, and you're agreeing with us, right? That one student left out is one student too many, right? But now we need to understand what exactly is supposed to be happening. What is the position of the institutions on this matter? We are telling you now that there are students who don't wait for the NSFAS outcome. There are universities, who don't wait for the NSFAS outcome of the student, and therefore that student cannot register. That deadline, you're right, Dr. Matutu, that universities have time frames. When that time frame is gone, umntwana is left out of the system. So what is supposed to be the agreement between NSFAS and universities on this particular matter? I think we must just, NSFAS, I don't even know if is there a rep from NSFAS in the meeting today? On the matter of the war room, we propose as a committee that the war room must be a permanent structure of the department that exists throughout the whole year, to also ensure that going into the future, we don't have similar situations taking place. NSFAS must make sure that they are at all TVET colleges, and we acknowledge that there has been proactiveness by the department and at times NSFAS in responding to the issues in the TVET colleges, but we really need to beef up the issue of guidelines, people being workshopped on guidelines. SAPCO cried a lot about misinterpretation of the guidelines. So we need to workshop DHET, our officials in our colleges and at NSFAS to understand the guidelines so that we don't have problems. We need to have conversation with labor and all stakeholders cannot be a hindrance to the resolve of various challenges in the sector. I've spoken to the issue of cooperative governance, which must include a session on conflict resolution, mediation, negotiation, and so forth. But also immediately, management must be able to account to the department on who these security companies are. You must know who they are, and they must account as to why these people are just doing as they like on our campuses, why they don't have badges. Like you would see DG, ipoisa. So our country is in terms of our safety and security measures, we have police who have badges. And if the police mistreat you, you can say Constable Banbani, Lieutenant Banbani mistreated me, or I spoke to Lieutenant Banbani. And now in our universities, there are people who are there who are put as security, who we don't know their names. So management must account to the department, must account to us as to how they procure these security services that have absolutely no alignment to the kind of culture that we're trying to build in our institutions. We would require that the departments, USAf and SAPCO, NSFAS brief us weekly on progress made in resolving the current challenges in the sector. We, as we have always implored during our oversight visits, want to also encourage that we've encouraged the universities and the colleges we interacted with during our oversight. But we also want to encourage USAf and SAPCO to establish relationships with local municipalities so that we're able to support our TVET colleges and our universities around the issues that speak to service provision around in the communities that we get affected by, but don't necessarily administer. We as a committee, and this is in response to infrastructure support, particularly for yourself, DHET, and of course for the CT program, and of course for the entire sector in terms of accommodation. We've began the engagements with Public Works, well, reignited the conversation with Public Works, and we will expect an update from yourselves on working relations and engagements with the Department of Public Works, given the fact that they even have a new minister. And so just because there's a new minister, there mustn't be now, like disjuncture between the conversations we had last week and this week, and let's work proactively towards that. It would be so nice that by the end of this year, in preparation for next year, we can already say that, hey, we've been able to get additional infrastructure from within government itself. can we please make sure that all colleges have their textbooks? And then we also need to ensure that that universities stick to the concessions that they make. I don't understand how they do these concessions. So 1 year it's there, 1 year it's not there, but they need to be there and they need to stick to them, and they need to be able to communicate thoroughly when these when there are changes to these concessions. And they need to be they also need to communicate thoroughly to parents, to students, to society, what the concessions are, so that those who need those concessions, particularly around, for example, registration and AODs that must be signed, repayment of student debt and so forth. I've spoken to the issues of NSFAS, and yeah, and I just think, I mean, some of the issues that colleagues have shared with us that are NSFAS related, they just need NSFAS to come in. Yeah, I think that's it in terms of clear recommendations, but I think we've also made our stance very clear as a committee on many of these issues. DG, we will be expecting that there are written submissions from all of us that can clarify some of the questions members asked. I don't think we are confident, to be honest. I think there's more hope there by the TVET program, but with the university program, I'm very worried. The Vice Chancellor of UKZN and the Vice Chancellor of WITS DG, you need to have a meeting with them directly, yourself as the DG, or even in fact, the Minister and the DM, the political leadership of the department, as well as yourself, DG, must have a direct conversation with those two. I don't think they're assisting the sector at all. I think we can leave it at that, colleagues, but I want to say that it will be important for us as a committee to write directly to these universities to account to us and see when we can call in some of them to come in and give us proper briefings. I think that the university program must go back, supported by USAf, and go and get proper information on what is happening in our institutions. Most importantly, numbers. Numbers are so important. Numbers can contribute to a state of anxiety or not. If someone says to me, yes, we had last week 6,000 students who were financially excluded, but now we're sitting on 1,000, and by tomorrow we'll be sitting on 500. You inspire way more confidence than speaking about issues being dealt with by case by case. That then leaves us at that, colleagues. I wish both programs, the university program and the TVET program, all the best in trying to address these issues, but you have noted our concerns as a committee, you have noted our recommendations, and I think it will be important for you to give us more information that may be easier for us to articulate and account on your behalf to citizens in bringing them to confidence. That then brings us, honorable members and colleagues, to the end of our meeting. We'll have to move minutes to Friday, because we all have to be in the house now to deal with questions and answers from ministers in the social services cluster. Thank you so much. This meeting has come to an end.